I say I got pictures of 8,000 prey, but to get those 8,000, you know, nice pictures of the prey, I mean, I was sorting through millions of, like literally millions of pictures.
In today's episode of the Backyard Ecology podcast, we're talking with Ashley Kennedy. Ashley is an entomologist who recently published her research on what eastern bluebird nestlings eat. Welcome to the Backyard Ecology podcast. Hey, Ashley, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I am so excited to talk with you today because I know that many of our listeners either have bluebird boxes on their property or they help maintain and monitor bluebird trails on public lands. Um, just everybody loves the bluebirds. So there's a lot of interest in bluebirds and what we as individuals can do to help them out. And that's where you come in because you've done some research looking at the diets of eastern bluebird nestlings. And of course, everybody focuses on putting up the bluebird boxes and providing that shelter. But making sure the nestlings have enough to eat and have the right things to eat is just as important.
Right. It's another huge component.
Right. And one that we don't think of as often. So, can you tell us a little bit about your research?
Sure. So I did my project as part of my doctoral research when I was a grad student at the University of Delaware. And my advisor was Doug Tallamy, who I know has been a guest on the show before, so I'm sure your listeners are very familiar with his work. Um, and he gets the credit for really coming up with the idea of it. I was just the one who tried to execute his vision. Um, but he is a really gifted photographer as well as being an ecologist. So he had taken some really nice images just in his yard or on travels of birds bringing insect prey back to feed their nestlings and, getting images that were crisp and clear enough to identify the prey, which hadn't really been done in the past. Like the past studies investigating birds' diets tended to be more invasive, so they're methods that we try and steer clear of these days. So there are a lot of older studies where they would dissect birds, cut open their gut to see what they've been eating. So, of course, we didn't want to be doing that. Another technique in the old days was to put a ligature around the necks of the nestlings, so it would actually prevent the food parcel from going down their gape, and so then you could come around and collect the prey just right out of their bills and identify it. So again, like really intrusive and unpleasant. Not something I would have ever been interested in doing. So photography just really jumped out as a nice non-invasive method. So and now with technology, we've got there's different kinds of camera traps, and cameras are getting smaller and cheaper and more accessible. So after shopping around a little bit, what we landed on was GoPro cameras, which are not your traditional trail camera. If I were doing it again today, I probably would go with trail cameras, which are motion activated. But at the time of the project, we had funding constraints, and the GoPros were the more affordable option. And even though they couldn't be motion activated, we could set them to take photos on a time lapse. And to make sure that we were not missing anything important, I set them to take photos every 1 second. So for the time that the cameras are running, they're just constantly, blip, 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 like taking one photo a second. And so most of those photos are not actually useful or interesting because there wouldn't it'd just be like a landscape shot of the meadow where where the bluebirds lived, because I put the cameras right on top of the nest box. Um, but when the bluebirds, alit on the roof of the box with prey, which they would typically do before going into the hole, like the entrance to the nest box, they would, I think they like to land there and just kind of scan, make sure they haven't been followed by a predator, before they go in. Just kind of survey their surroundings. So that gave us kind of the perfect opportunity to snap some good pictures of the prey, like right up close before they delivered it to the nestlings inside. So I did it for several summers. This was back, it was 2015, 2016, 2017, in 2018. So yeah, 4 seasons. And so at least, I can say for northern Delaware, I have a really solid idea of what the bluebirds are eating, because we got images of over 8,000 prey
Oh,
items.
wow.
And most of those, like, I want to say upwards of like 90% of them we were able to identify at least to the ordinal level. So, those broad groupings, like we could say, like, well, it's some kind of caterpillar or it's, some kind of beetle. And then, a smaller subset, we could get down to the family level or even down to the genus or species. About a quarter of them, we could get down that far.
And you said they were taking pictures every second.
Yes.
Was that like every second from sunup to sundown,
Oh,
or
great question. So we were limited by the battery life of the GoPros. So my typical day from like April to August during those 4 years was, I'd get up before dark, leave the house so that I would arrive to Mount Cuba Center, which is our field site, just really beautiful natural lands. Um, and I'd try and get the cameras set up as close to sunrise as possible. And then the battery would typically last like just under 4 hours, and I would come around again with a replacement after those 4 hours and get a second batch of photos in for. So it would work out to about 8 hours out of the day. So it didn't capture every prey item that they brought back, but it was still um, it was capturing the most active part of their foraging day, because it does start to, taper off throughout the day. And it was a deeper investigation than had been done before for that species.
oh yeah. And I mean, even with no matter what kind of study you're doing, you have to figure out what your sample size is, how often you're going to sample. I mean, even with the motion activated cameras,
Hmm.
you're setting a time frame and have this long of a gap between the
Hmm.
pictures that you take, basically, um, for like
Right.
the trail cameras. So yeah, that's always comes into play, which is why I was asking, because I was going every
Mhm.
second through. No, there's got to be a timeline here.
Yeah, I mean, it's still, I say I got pictures of 8,000 prey, but to get those 8,000, you know, nice pictures of the prey, I mean, I was sorting through millions of, like literally millions of pictures. So most of them just got deleted because there's not even a bird in the shot. And then sometimes the bird would just be hanging out there, but not holding on to any prey. So, but even after deleting all those photos that were not helpful, I mean, that still left me with thousands that were useful. And so I tried to capture some photos of, so in Delaware, the bluebirds do two broods typically. So there'd be a first brood, usually like April or May, maybe into June, and then the second brood's picking up, usually in July and August. So it kept me busy for a big chunk of the year, spring and summer.
Quick question. Do you think Backyard Ecology content is at least as valuable as one bottle of soda per month? If so, please consider becoming a financial supporter to help us continue producing all of our free content. It doesn't take much if we all work together. Even the equivalent of everyone who hears this contributing just $2 to $3 per month, or the cost of one soda per month, would allow us to produce a year's worth of videos, blogs, podcasts, newsletters, and our other free content. I'll have links in the description for how you can contribute. And if you've already contributed, thank you so much. We appreciate your willingness to help us provide free educational content about plants, pollinators, and wildlife that can be found in our yards and communities.
So, what were they bringing it?
Yeah, so I try not to bury the lead too much, and I'll just open with telling people how important caterpillars are. So Lepidoptera, the moths and butterflies, that was definitely the best represented group in the diet. And it was about 35 to 40%, I want to say. Um, and and it mostly all caterpillars. I mean, there would occasionally be adult moths or butterflies, but um, mostly it was caterpillars, and mostly it was these kind of inconspicuous, like smooth green caterpillars. So if you think of like little inchworms, or just you know, the caterpillars that are trying to blend in and camouflage with their environment, and that makes a lot of sense just intuitively, because if camouflage is their anti-predator defense, then they're probably not loaded with toxins or sharp spines or other types of defenses. So nothing that the birds have to worry about like choking on or reacting to chemically. So something that's not going to make them sick. So not a big surprise that that group was so well represented. And there's been a lot of past research on what makes caterpillars so nutritious to bluebirds or to birds and other wildlife generally. They're, they have a high fat content, so they're full of energy. They've got different micronutrients, different vitamins that are important. They have a high moisture content. They're low in chitin, so like most insects have that really tough kind of exoskeleton that protects them like a suit of armor, and it's difficult to break down digestively. But caterpillars are very, they're soft and squishy, so just a really easy meal, especially for a baby bird. And Dr. Talmy has a hypothesis that the carotenoids in particular are very important, and so those are um, important for a variety of reasons. They kind of boost the immune system. They can actually improve color vision. So I don't know if you remember like being a little kid and grown-ups were always telling you like you have to eat your carrots because they're
Yes.
good for your eyes. And there's like some truth to that because they're full of beta carotene and that's a precursor to vitamin A, which does improve vision.
My
So
grandmother told me that all the time, and I got thick glasses when I was in kindergarten, and he would always say, "You gotta eat your carrots because then you'll be able to see in the dark like a jackrabbit." And because this is a little kid brain, of course, my little
hmm
kid brain went to, "Okay, I can see better in the light than the dark. So therefore, if I eat enough carrots, I won't have to wear glasses anymore."
If only it was that simple. Well, they're full of carotenoids. And for birds, another reason that carotenoids are important is it can actually impact the color of their plumage. Um, and bluebirds, of course, they're mostly blue, and the blue color is not determined by carotenoids or it's more like structural, like how the light is hitting the feathers is what creates that color. And I'm starting to get a little bit out of my wheelhouse, but that's my understanding. But if you picture like a male bluebird, they've got like that red chest and the red plumage. That is going to be influenced by like how many carotenoids they're consuming. So reds and yellows and oranges are dependent on carotenoids, and that's important because there's evidence that birds are choosing their mates based on the brightness of their plumage, and you can think of the brightness of their plumage as an honest indicator of their overall health and their quality as a mate. So the male that looks bright and healthy probably is relative to his counterparts probably is a little healthier. So that's one of the reasons we think caterpillars might be so attractive to birds.
So if that was the most common, were there others that were commonly done or?
Yes. So the next biggest group after the Lepidoptera was the Orthoptera. So that's going to be your crickets and grasshoppers and katydids. And all of those families were represented. In this group, the biggest surprise for me was once in a while, not too commonly, but more than I would expect, I saw mole crickets. And mole crickets live underground. They've got these big front paws for digging. I say paws, that's not the right word, but but they look like a mole, hence the name. And I never see them. I'd be out at Mount Cuba every day, in the same meadows where these bluebirds are foraging, and I would never see the mole crickets. So, they're not coming to the surface of the soil very often, but the bluebirds must have been just really skilled, really like able to home in on them on those rare occasions when they do pop up to the surface.
That is interesting because, yeah, that's not, I wouldn't have expected that at all because like you said, the
Yeah,
mole crickets, they're not out in the fields and stuff, which is actually, I was kind of surprised that there was more caterpillars than there were like the grasshoppers and the katydids and stuff because you think
right.
of the bluebirds as being open fields and stuff like that. Now, of course, they're cavity nesters, so
hmm
the trees have to come into play somewhere along the line um, with it. But still, I mean, it's just, oh,
I mean, I
yeah,
guess those meadows are full of caterpillars too.
true.
I mean, I think we just don't see them as well as the bluebirds see
Yeah.
them.
Camouflage.
And exactly. And the third biggest group was the spiders, and that was combination of jumping spiders and orb weavers, crab spiders, but especially kind of the bigger like wolf spiders. So I think they're you know seeking out the bigger ones, just more bang for the buck, more calories for the effort. And and I got to give them credit. I'm not an arachnophobe per se, but if I were the size of a bluebird and I was going for like a pretty large wolf spider, I mean, so some of them were, getting large enough where I wouldn't want it near my face, and but they're fearless. So, and then those were like the big three groups. So Lepidoptera, Orthoptera, and Araneae, which is the spiders. And then after that, um, everything else made up a like pretty small percentage if you're looking at just one group at a time. Like I think beetles made about 3%, and like the true bugs, so things like cicadas and stink bugs and assassin bugs, that was about 1%. Praying mantises about 1%. I always would kind of joke though, like if I had had a way to measure the volume of the prey and not just like the frequency of the prey, some of the praying mantises were huge, so I think they would be better represented if we could account for volume. Once in a while, there'd be true flies, so something from the order Diptera, like a big to banded like horsefly, or most often it would be crane flies, which I think that might just be due to convenience, because crane flies are kind of like slow moving. They're just kind of like drifting along and easy to catch.
Yeah, and I wouldn't think they'd be much too. I mean, they're just like a little twig with big legs.
Exactly. Yeah, not a lot of meat on those bones, so to speak. And there were a couple weird things. So, no, I would say some unusual observations. In fact, I published a couple of just little scientific notes, where you just say like, "Oh, I saw a weird thing." Um, and so one was that the bluebirds occasionally were foraging on reptiles and amphibians. So I think about 5 frogs over the course of the 4 summers that I monitored them.
Frogs.
And yes, and
Wow.
then once it was a snake. It was a little baby northern brown snake. So, and they would sometimes, fairly often, they would forage for worms. And this baby snake was basically like, I mean, visually it looked just like a big fat worm. So,
And well, I mean, with the
and
brown snakes and stuff, I mean, they're commonly, when somebody first sees them, until they see the tongue or something, they're commonly mistaken just at first glance for
yeah,
that. So I can see how a bluebird would do that. But a frog?
yeah. And as far as I know, they were, consumed successfully. And my cameras were just on the outside of the nest box, and I don't know what happened on the inside, but I never found, after the bluebirds had fledged and the nest was empty, I didn't find like a snake just still in there. Like I said, I think it made its way, I think it was digested and everything. So
Interesting.
I often felt like I wished I'd had a camera on the inside though.
Well, yes, but you can only do so much with any one
Yeah.
project.
Oh, and one other group that was not common in the diet, but I didn't expect it at all. So occasionally the bluebirds foraged on immature dragonflies. And the reason this is a big deal is that, immature dragonflies are aquatic.
Yeah.
So they, so it's kind of funny. I had a dragonfly expert identify them from the photos, and he told me that they were in the family Echinidae, which are these large and long-lived dragonflies. And he said, like, this dragonfly probably spent 3 to 5 years underwater successfully avoiding predation, and then on like the very day, like the moment that it came out of the water to close as an adult, it got snatched up by this bluebird. Because we know the bluebirds aren't going into the water foraging, or at least no one's seen that. So we have to imagine it got it just in that very narrow window, when it came out on land and had not yet metamorphosed into the adult.
Which is crazy and amazing to think about, because
Yeah.
that's not a long window at all.
Yeah, so very unusual finding.
Which is just so cool that we've got the technology now to allow us to
Yeah.
capture some of those weird and crazy things that happen.
Yeah, I think it just really goes to show how opportunistic, different wildlife can be.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of Backyard Ecology? Do you want to make sure you don't miss out on any of our content, announcements, or other fun stuff we have planned? Then be sure to sign up for our free weekly newsletter. Each week you will receive a helpful email from us with tips, stories, upcoming events, and our newest content. all conveniently packaged in a way that will take less than 5 minutes to read. I will have a link in the description for how you can join the thousands of others who have already subscribed to our free newsletter.
So, given that they nest multiple times throughout the season,
Hmm.
um, like sometimes down in the more southern areas of the range, they can do 3 nests or attempt three.
Right.
So, 2 to 3
Hmm.
nests a season. Did you see really any change in what they were bringing throughout the
Um,
season?
yeah, there were some differences. For example, I think pretty much all the praying mantises were observed when it was the second brood versus the first brood. Um, I want to say that the level of or the representation of Orthoptera in the diet went up for the later broods, which is all pretty much expected based on their activity patterns throughout the year. Um, so the caterpillars were, I think, even more important for the first brood. So like, in April and May, like caterpillars are, very abundant and very important.
And that makes sense too, because I mean, April and May, you don't see a lot of grasshoppers or katydid. I mean, they really get going more
Hmm.
as the season progresses and you get into those warmer months.
And one thing that so I recently with co-authors had published the findings of this Bluebird study, and there is another component to it that is not yet published, but I'll go ahead and share it with you because it's related. Um, so Doug Doug Tallamy kept correcting me when he would hear me saying something like, "Oh, the bluebirds love caterpillars," or that they really prefer caterpillars, and he would correct me because he's like, you don't know that they prefer them or that they even like them. You just know that they're eating them at a high frequency. He's like, You're gonna have to come up with some kind of study to determine if they actually prefer them." So, and I'll gloss over like a whole lot of trial and error because figuring out how to test this was like a comedy of errors. Um, but I got some inspiration from the pet food industry because they have the same general problem of they're trying to assess what kind of food pets like when you can't just, ask them to fill out a survey, right? So you have to come up with a more creative way to look into it. And um, so I did something called like first choice analysis, which is so I would present the birds with a variety of insects, and I had them freshly killed. So in my study, they were not live insects like they would forage for naturally, but they were, I had them frozen, and then I put them out on the roof of the nest box, and so there'd be um, an even number of evenly sized arthropods. So I think, let me see, I had mealworms, crickets, waxworms, which are a type of caterpillar. The mealworms are larval beetles. I had stink bugs, and then I had cabbage loopers, which are a smooth green caterpillar. So in any given trial, there would be two types of insects, and I would put, six of one species and six of another species, and the GoPro's there to record the order that the birds ate them in. And and I found that the waxworms, which are a caterpillar, that was their number one favorite prey, and the stink bugs were their least favorite. So, it was only 5 different insects that we were able to test, but we did see that, like, yes, they do have preferences, and they're exercising those preferences. So, I'm sure in reality, they're going to be constrained somewhat by what's available, what's around, but um, I do feel comfortable now saying like yes, they do exercise preferences. They're not just eating any insect that they happen to come across, equally.
Yeah, that's interesting too. And
So,
that's what I was kind of getting at, was about to ask if there was any way you had, if you'd done any piece of the study that would show that, or if that was the kind of the next step. But yeah. So you said you had the waxworms and you had the like little green inchworm type one.
okay. The cabbage loopers I would have predicted would be their favorite just because I saw them eating so many little green caterpillars. And I think and that was not the case. They tended to um, I think they were actually like the fourth preferred out of that
Oh
group of
wow.
5. But here's the thing. Um, the cabbage leapers had a really high moisture content, and what that meant was in the hot summer sun, they would decompose so quickly. So, and I could see it on the images from my cameras. It was like if the birds didn't notice the insects right away and like come eat them like within minutes after me putting them out, like they might sit there for 15 or 30 minutes. And when a dead cricket has been sitting in the sun for 30 minutes, it still just looks like a cricket, and a mealworm still looks like a mealworm, but the cabbage leapers would shrivel up and turn black, and they no longer looked at all lifelike. I mean, they had a very dramatic transformation that they went through. So if I could have figured out some way to, maybe like freeze dry them, or maybe if I had figured out a way to maintain their lifelike appearance and keep them looking fresh, I have a hunch that the bluebirds would have liked them better, but that is purely speculation on my part, just and biased by what I saw them foraging for naturally. So to be determined.
Yeah.
Didn't sufficiently answer that question.
But you made steps towards it and you got
Yes.
and that's what it always is with science is you ask a question, you come up with more questions.
Right.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So initially, we wanted to do multiple bird species and not just focus on eastern bluebirds. And so initially, I'd put cameras out at house wren nest boxes too. And that turned out to be just a epic fail. And I think it has to do with the behavior of the birds is so different. So we really lucked out when we picked eastern bluebirds, because I didn't realize going into it just how cooperative they were going to be as models. Like they have, like as I mentioned, that habit of landing on the roof, and I swear it almost seemed like they knew what was going on and they were posing for us, like trying to show us the prey. Like they would, turn one way and then turn the other way and be like, did you get a good close up of it this way? And, just so cooperative. And then the house wrens, they would typically just fly directly into the entrance of the nest box. They wouldn't land on the roof, or if they were on the roof, they were moving around so fast that all the shots came out blurry, and I just couldn't identify the prey. So after the first season, I just totally gave up on the house wrens. So this won't work with all cavity nesters, but the bluebirds are, just really excellent models.
Which is an important thing to point out too, because we tend to take research that's done on one species in one location and then try and apply it to all species in all locations. And this is for any type of research, really. And that's
Right.
not, it doesn't necessarily work that way. So,
Right.
yeah, we need to have projects like this repeated in other locations and with other species. And yeah, sometimes you may have a cooperative species that's going to stand there and pose, and other
Yeah.
times you may have to come up with a different way to figure it
And one of my co-authors, Ian Stewart, he's an ornithologist. He pointed out we lucked out with the design of the nest boxes too, because they had just a nice flat roof, or it was very gently sloping. But a lot of them are designed with like a steep slope, and so the birds don't alight on them as much. Or so it really, all these pieces fell into place where the project wound up being more successful than it had any right to be.
And one of the things that I really love about your research is that it has these really direct applications that we can take from it and things that we can do as individuals to really help the bluebirds around us, which is something that we're going to talk about in the next episode of the Backyard Ecology
All right.
podcast. So yeah, thanks a lot for being on here today.
It was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
And you can hear our conversation all about how to apply Ashley's research in this video. And until next time, don't forget to take some time to enjoy the nature in your yard and community.